All right, let's talk through the exposition section to this Haydn Sonata in C major, just to get a feel on how it works and what are some things that we want to look for and what are ways that composers try to communicate to us, try to give us hints at where we are in the structure. Because remember, they don't want us to get lost. They're not trying to confuse us, right? They want us to follow along with the structure. So what are things that they want us to hear, and what are some sneaky common techniques that composers use? Because remember, the goals of the exposition are twofold. Number one, to get us tonally from 1 to, in this case, since we're in major, 1 to 5, right? So there's a harmonic tonal goal to get from the home key to 5, but there's also a motivic, melodic goal, which is to make sure that we recognize the main theme, right? That's important. It would be not so good if we made it out of the exposition section, which is supposed to be the clear, understandable part of the piece, and got into the development, but we didn't really recognize or remember any of the themes. So that's a secondary idea here. How do composers bring that sense of understandability and memorability into the melodic aspects of the exposition section? So let's dig into this here. So here's the beginning, and this is our main theme. And I want to talk a little bit about why that might be surprising, but also how we can be fairly certain that this is the main theme. So here's the first 4 measures. This is the main theme of this piece. Boom. Short and sweet, right? Now, the thing that's confusing if you're looking at the music when you listen to this is that, and we'll talk about this in a second, but what happens next is, so that was measures 5 and 6, which sound a whole lot like measures 1 and 2. Right? So there's a lot of overlap. There's more than a lot. It's the same music. So the question then is, how can we know that the main theme ends in measure 4? So that's the question for you. How do we know that this is the main theme? It's staring you right in the face. What is it? It's that we get a cadence, right? That's the big idea here. So the fact that we end with an authentic cadence, it doesn't even have to be authentic, it could be a half cadence, but a cadence, remember, that's the musical way that a composer tells you, okay, we did that, we finished. So when you're listening to sonatas, let the experience of hearing a cadence clarify the form for you. Haydn wants you to know that the main theme is over here. He wants you to know that we have ended the main theme because we got a cadence in the home key, right? And if you think about the structure of a sonata, we'll see a little bit of weirdness in this one, but the structure of a sonata in the exposition section is that we've got main theme area, right, which is all in the home key. Transition starts in the home key and ends in the secondary key. So the transition is going to have a cadence that's not as clear in the home key, and the secondary key is none of it in the home key. So the only time that we should really get a cadence in the home key is at the end of the main theme. So if you do find one, right, like here we've got. Also note that this, what you're seeing, I've retyped, so I took away a lot of the little trills and, stuff like that. So this is a slightly simplified version, but I hope that idea of the cadence clarifying the structure, right, the form of the piece, that's really, really important. So we get a cadence in the home key, that ends the main theme. Now, let's go to that next section, which we know should be the transition section, which, as we said, starts with the main theme again, and it really has this feel of overall not traveling far from home. And there's another aspect to that, which we'll talk about in a second, but the first and most critical way that it very much doesn't travel far from home is that he reuses the main theme as the beginning of his transition section. and I cannot state this enough, this is extremely common and is really, really important. Because, like I said, the composer needs to make sure that when we get out of when we get out of the exposition, we will recognize the main theme of this piece, right? This is the reason why do movies always hire these big movie stars to play their main character? They want us to recognize them, right? It doesn't do us any good if we're still 3/4 of the way through the movie and we're like, is that the woman from the beginning? Is she the main character? Like, I don't recognize. I would have sworn her hair was like a darker colored, almost brown. That doesn't do us any good. You need to look at it and be like, oh yeah, I recognize her. That's insert famous actress here, right? So the main theme has to be like that. And so the transition is an opportunity for a composer to remind us by reusing. Because if they don't take this opportunity, which they often don't, but if they don't, we'll hear the main theme in the first 4 measures. And then maybe not again for a little while. It will be not as clear when it comes back. So composers will often reuse the main theme as the beginning of their transition. But of course, at the beginning, right, we get this little starting fragment. And then it continues. Here, we do it. And then it changes slightly. Right, so it's kind of related. Right, it's got a similar bent to it, but this second half is definitely different, and we'll look at one way that it's majorly different. But there's the other thing going on here again is the composer wants you to feel like you understand the structure of the piece. Most of them do. We're going to see ways that old friend Wolfie Mozart doesn't always want us to be able to follow along because he's kind of a trickster. But in this one, Haydn, this is, like, you can tell, this is a playful little piece. This is not the kind of piece that tells you about the nature of suffering and pain in the world and the true, what makes a person really a person, what's the human spirit there. That's not what this piece is, right? This is it's a night at court in the Esterhazy estate. Right? They're having fun in Austria. That's life. And so it's not meant to be this huge, expansive study of all of human emotional complexity. So it has this element of not really traveling far from home. And so reusing the main theme is a big part of that. But the unique thing about this one is that as a transition, we get to kind of a half cadence here. But we haven't really modulated, right? We didn't really leave C major. We feel like we're arriving at a half cadence on G. But the transition in most cases, and I really want to point that out, in most cases is going to have a much more clear modulation out of C major and into G major. This is a slight exception. I think it fits the overall mood of the piece, which is light, not very expansive. So it really works from a this piece's core identity perspective to not really modulate. But still, he does get to 5 at the end of the transition, which sets us up nicely for where we're supposed to go next, which is, of course, the secondary key area. And what we're going to find in this one, and hopefully you heard this when you listened to it, is that there are really 2 secondary key areas in this one, in this piece. I would say that having either 2 or 3 secondary key areas are by far the most common approach. So 2 is often the case, but 3 is the textbook example. So you should be on the lookout for 3, but be okay with 2. If you analyze only 1 secondary key area, that happens. That does happen, but you should think about why, and that's definitely going to be a fairly short piece. Or if you analyze more than 3 secondary key areas, you should definitely rethink what you're doing. 3 is most common. 2 definitely happens. 1, yeah, sometimes. Not the most common, but sometimes. More than 3, no. So this is secondary key area 1. And tell me, we just got to this half cadence, right, in measure 7 and 8, right? So here is our half cadence at the end of the transition. And now we get to what's on the screen. Tell me what sounds familiar about this. Right? What sounds familiar about that? Well, of course, we're borrowing from the main theme again. We're in G major now, right? We're in 5, our secondary key, and we're expanding on the main theme, turning it into a little bit of a melody with a different accompaniment. Right, getting to a little cadence there, pardon my flubs. So again, we have gone directly into G here, which is kind of nice. So we're in our secondary key, and Haydn is completely borrowing again from himself by using the main theme as the ska 1 melody, right? Really, really typical here of a super, super tight-knit, self-contained sonata movement. That's part of what makes this one feel so closed off and in its own sort of in its own world and really well put together. Not that all good sonatas are going to continually reuse the main theme, but this one is trying to be small and contained, and this element really contributes to that. So we've got the main theme, and then let's look at the end of this one. So starting at about measure, I don't know, let me count here, 11, 12, 13, measure 13, right around here. I'll do the little pickups here. We sort of get to the ending of this idea. So that little cadence there should feel kind of unique, right? For much of this, he's had these fairly built-up harmonic ideas, right? Big chords, right? It's sort of big, and then by the end, we definitely can kind of hear a cadence, right? We get this 5-1 motion, but it's not like we have this big, 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 bombastic, chord-filled cadential idea. No. We have this majorly stripped down and kind of weak cadential motion, which is really critical because the end of our first little secondary key area is probably not the most important structural place for us, right? So we have to keep in mind the overall cadential weight, or even, in many cases, the mere presence of a cadence is really critical in sonata form. But this is we would call this like an internal section, right? The secondary key area 1. It's not even special enough to just be secondary key area. This is ska 1. And so we have this really weak cadence. He obviously wants to stop this idea, but not do it in a huge way because we're about to continue onwards in the secondary key area. So by using a really, really weak cadence here, we can feel a strong sense of structural connection between ska 1, which we just looked at, and ska 2. A strong cadence would separate them, right? And that's, again, just going back to the way that Haydn ends the main theme. That's a pretty strong ending idea, right? He wants us to know, look, main theme over. I know I'm about to repeat the same melody in the transition, but the main theme is ended. Right? We don't get as strong an ending at the end of ska 1 because we want it to continue into ska 2. And I hope you hear this ending is much stronger, right? It feels like a fully... We even get a trill for our troubles, which is, always nice. So let's look here. Finally, in ska 2, we're not basing the melody off of the main theme, which is a change of pace for sure. And we can sort of hear how this ska 2 idea is really just driving us towards the cadence. or the end of the exposition. Everything we have is really harmonically oriented. Right? Even this dominant seventh arpeggio. So it's like chords masquerading as melodies, which is, I know this is a Haydn piece. We're going to see that's a very, very classic Beethoven trick. But this is a really nice ska too, because we're going to get a stronger cadence. This is the first time we're not based on the main theme, so we can really feel like we're driving to an ending, finishing this out, and that's how the exposition of this piece comes to a close. So hopefully, let's sort of go over some of the big ideas here. The big things that we really want to see there are use the cadential motion, or the presence of a cadence or the strength of the cadence, to really clarify the sections. Let a cadence tell you when an idea is over. Thing number 2, transitions very commonly use the main theme again at the beginning of the transition. So just because you're hearing the same melody doesn't mean that we're in the same functional area, right? The main theme area and the main theme melody are one unit. Transition unit with the main theme melody happens a lot of the time, and it's not there to trick you. It's there to make sure that we remember the main theme melody. So when we're analyzing this, use the cadences to tell you when a section is over, because as we saw, the main theme melody is probably going to come up a bunch because the composer's trying to infuse it into so much of the musical material to make sure it's really familiar, to make sure we recognize it, so that when it's transformed even more later, we completely understand what's going on. So that was a walkthrough of the exposition of the Haydn C major sonata. Let's look at the G major one. Give that a listen, and you're going to turn that in as homework.